Well, hi y'all, thanks for joining me. We're here in southeast Kansas, a little town of Mound Valley, visiting family and enjoying a few days of rest. Been in Arkansas visiting family there as well. Later on this week, we're going to go over to Wichita and visit some good friends, spend a day with them, and then going to Branson, Missouri for a few days of vacation before we head back home. Glad you're here with me. Looking forward to sharing this next chapter of my book project of School by the Smokies. To step aside is human, Robert Burns. Sometimes you have to step aside to see more. Chapter 7.
Hi y'all, Dan here. Thanks for joining me.
I'm wondering if you'd go wandering with me through the wilderness and woods to where the winds are blowing free, through the darkness of the night, heading toward the morning light. I wonder if you'd wander with me.
As I drone on and on about how important blazes are to hikers, and I stress the need to stay on the path, you might get the idea that I never strike out on a new course, one that isn't marked, or a destiny never explored. Kat is a friend who listened to excerpts from my chapters about blazes and paths, and she commented, "But sometimes you have to step aside to see more." Kat is a fellow hiker who shares her adventures on the YouTube channel Steps by Katchi. I enjoy her wanderings and humor and wisdom, and she's right. Sometimes we do have to step aside to see more. Stepping aside from well-worn paths and exploring uncharted ways open new worlds. Some are beautiful and rewarding, others are dangerous. Sometimes the beautiful and the dangerous share a common trail. Determining the difference, I believe, requires preparation and experience. The young man who sat on the top of Springer Mountain didn't seem to be prepared, and I don't think he had ever hiked before. Striking out to hike even well-traveled paths like the Appalachian Trail is treacherous for the ill-prepared. As we plod through miles of trails on a variety of hikes, we gain experience to recognize dangers and to decide whether to avoid those dangers or to try to manage the risk so that we can enjoy the rewards of exploring new things. Experience is a great gift. I like to describe wisdom as the product of education and experience. Education alone, whether formal education or research about a specific trail to hike, isn't enough. We probably know highly educated, well-informed people who are as dumb as the rocks that we complain about as we hike the Appalachian Trail in Pennsylvania. Book smarts only prepare us for experience. To use an old Army term, shavetails refer to newly minted second lieutenants. I can relate to this because I was one of those lieutenants. The phrase comes from the horse cavalry days. Soldiers would shave the tail of a new mule to show that it was untrained and unreliable. They began to teach the mule how to carry its load and how to follow instructions. The schooling lasted until the mule's tail grew back, and then it was trustworthy because it had gained experience. We all began as shavetails. We just may not be easily recognized as rookies. I have stepped aside to see more, and I've been blessed by doing so. When I shared my experience bushwhacking through the dense forest near the Dan River, I described the near disaster of discovering the cliff edge. Had I stepped through the ground cover and into space, the fall would have been bad. However, I knew enough to walk carefully and feel for potential dangers. Stepping aside held dangers, but there were also great treasures. The greatest treasure of that adventure was the fawn that laid curled up on a patch of smooth grass, her body covered by the white spots of infancy. She was so peaceful, sleeping as her mother was out foraging for food. I stood back and looked,
capturing the discovery with my camera and feeling as if I had discovered a pot of gold at the rainbow's end. Nothing could have been more exciting at that moment. I stepped aside and had seen much more than expected. Other trails taught this lesson. There were many opportunities to step aside and see more. Several examples stand out from my walk through the Great Smoky Mountains. I'm sure many trails will echo this wise maxim as well. On the first official day of my Appalachian Trail journey, I began walking north from Springer Mountain. The weather and temperature felt like spring, but it was early March, and winter would make itself known soon enough, but not today. It was an exciting day, warm and sunny. As I walked, the first descending down into Three Forks Junction and then climbing up Hawk Mountain, after about 5 miles into the journey, I saw a blue blaze off to my left. There was a wood sign with Long Creek Falls carved into its face. I stood at the juncture. Looking ahead was the white blaze of the Appalachian Trail calling me onward. I planned to hike another 3 miles before stopping to pitch my tent, boil water for my instant dinner, and sleep my first night on the trail. But the blue blaze also spoke and said, "You may never come this way again. I have sights for you to see. Come here. Step aside and see more." I stepped aside and walked down the path toward the sound of rushing water. At the end of the blue blazed path was a waterfall. It was amazing. The trail had been sort of monotonous all along the way. Not monotonous in a bad way. All of it was new and exciting. It was exciting to see the white blazes on the trees, the rhododendron that thickly borders each side of the worn pathway, little log bridges that offer dry crossings over the streams that crisscross the trail. And these were common views as I walked. And then there are the openings between the trees near the mountain tops. And those openings are like nature's windows to show the beautiful vistas that extend from layer upon layer of mountain ranges, separated only by tree-covered valleys. However, here was something different. Here was more. Water cascaded down over the rocky steps, foamed white by the power of its flow, and crashed 10 feet into a pool where the water became crystal clear before rushing down the creek through rapids around large boulders worn smooth by the ageless stream. Only a single overused word came into my mind as I stood there: beautiful. I was so glad that I had listened to the blue blaze, stepped aside, and seen much more. 2 weeks later, the trail once again invited me to step aside. I was tempted to ignore her call this time. I'd entered the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. This part of the trail intimidated me. I felt like I was stepping into a wilderness where there was no escape. The only option once I entered was to go through. No turning back. And I don't know where those thoughts came from. None of them are true. I discovered the same network of forest roads that intersect the trail from Georgia to Maine. Still, the Smokies seemed ominous. The opening climb that greets hikers from the little black box where we deposit our park permits and the next 5 miles is an unrelenting, grueling up. I met many fellow hikers along the way who rested and shared their personal doubts about making it through the Smokies. And we had just begun the journey. I continued to climb, clawing away at the core of my endurance and praying for this to be over. Blood Mountain, Jacob's Ladder, even the 603 steps that ascended Amicalola Falls didn't compare to this climb. One step at a time, moving my failing legs and trying to fill my oxygen-deprived lungs, I finally came to a little stream that gave herself to thirsty hikers who had made our way to her reward. Rose was a young lady who sat among the weary travelers filtering water from the stream. Rose was tired from the climb, but excited to see all of the beauties of nature. And she called out to me saying, "Monk, you've got to go up to the tower." At the top of the mountain was a fire tower called Shuckstack Tower. To get to the base of that tall structure that appeared to be made of an old-time erector set, I'd have to climb another quarter of a mile over rocks and boulders. Perhaps this was a blue blaze to ignore. However, Rose kept telling me to go up and see the views. "They're worth it," she said. "It wasn't far," she said. "It was an easy walk," she said. I surrendered and began climbing toward the tower. My legs had stiffened from sitting too long. My lungs burned for air again. My body seemed to say, "Who do you think you are, and why are you doing this to me?" I shouted back down the trail, "Rose, I hate you," and we both laughed. She was right about the views being worth the effort. They were great rewards. Of course, she wasn't as truthful about the distance and the ease of getting to the tower. Still, I knew, even before climbing the tower, that this was amazing. Each section of the climb offered a new revelation of beauty. When I climbed through the little hole in the floor of the very top, the views were wonderful. The sky was blue with white puffy clouds high above the mountains that extended out row upon row and disappeared beyond the horizon. It was as if the Smokies were introducing themselves to us, saying, "Here we are. You're welcome to come to visit. We aren't going anywhere, and we'll teach you if you'll listen." I kept this view in mind throughout this part of the journey. The old mountains spoke truth. They were faithful, and they taught me about their beauty and myself. As I entered the Smokies, they welcomed me with a grand, though demanding, hello. As I prepared to leave them 6 days later, their farewell was equally spectacular. The next invitation to step aside was Mount Camera. A story of stepping aside to see more would be incomplete if I didn't share about Mount Camera once again. Walking north on the trail from Tricorner Knob before sunrise, I enjoyed the now familiar subtle changes in the sky and the birds cheerfully singing their welcome to me. It was a stark contrast from the night before, where scores of tents dotted the main trail before and after the path leading down to the shelter area. The serenity of the morning hike was very different than the chaos of the crowded hills and valleys that were filled with more tents surrounding the small shelter that was overflowing with hikers seeking refuge in it. In the solitude of the early morning, I felt a deep conviction that I would not repeat my nighttime experience again this evening. I began to plan for an 18-mile trek that would take me out of the Smokies. It was early, and there would be a few hard climbs. I could do this. However, something inside gnawed at my emotions. I didn't want to leave this part of the trail just yet. I wanted one more night here, but I wanted to be able to soak it in and appreciate the experience. These conflicting desires wrestled with one another as I searched for a compromise. My original plan was to hike from Tricorner Knob to Davenport Gap, a 15-mile stretch. There were 2 shelters within 7 miles of one another. I thought the caravan of hikers might split up between these points, and others would hike through to Standing Bear Farm or beyond. Then a ridge runner stopped by as I ate lunch and told me that Cosby Knob Shelter was closed due to an aggressive bear that had destroyed a hiker's tent. Without that shelter, Davenport Gap would likely be a repeat scene of last night's experience. I faced a dilemma. The ridge runner moved on, and I began looking at my narrow options. Suddenly, I looked at the Guthook app on my phone and saw a tower symbol. Perhaps there was another option. Perhaps I could step aside and see more. After hiking 11 miles, I came to a blue blaze that marked the side trail to Mount Camera Fire Observation Structure. It was another 0.7 miles to the building. The first half mile of the trail was smooth and mostly level. I met several day hikers who said that The view from there was well worth the visit. I didn't share my intentions of possibly spending the night there. Pushing on down the path, I came to a pile of boulders. The path disappeared. It didn't veer right or left, so I decided to climb up the pile and see what I could see. The boulders kept ascending like a poorly planned staircase. And finally, I saw a white, two-story building. Windows, now mostly broken, surrounded the outer wall of the round structure. It had been built in 1939 by the Civilian Conservation Corps workers. It must have been lovely in its day. It still was lovely, even though it was weathered with age, wind, and rain. I wasn't really sure that Mount Camera would offer the retreat that I wanted before stepping through the propped doorway and listening to the strong breeze rushing through the broken windows and the rustling of cloth material tacked over the openings. The old structure creaked and banged as the wind blew on the top of the mountain. And there were comments on Gut Hook by previous hikers who had stayed there. Some wrote about huge rats that visited during the night. Others commented that the visitors were not rats, but friendly ferrets. Honestly, I didn't want either to disturb my sleep. As the sun began to set and the shadows descended on the panorama surrounding the tower, I knew this was the gift I needed for my final night in the Smokies. I was so thankful that I had stepped aside and seen so much more. Just as the Smoky Mountains had greeted me with a welcome at Shuckstack Tower, now they wished me a fond farewell at Camera Tower. As the evening prayer says, Lord, grant me a peaceful night and a perfect end. My experience on the top of Mount Camera was healing for the body, mind, and spirit. There was space to reflect and respond to the many lessons that I had learned. And I realized that I had been schooled by the Smokies, and my education was far from complete. I love these mountains and the gifts of life they hold within themselves. This is creation. Each opportunity to step aside is filled with the blessing to see more. The only thing that can prepare us for these gifts is the trail itself, and she is the best teacher.
I'm wondering if you'd come wandering my way. If you ever get lost, or if the trail leads you astray, the music of the pack can always bring you back. I wonder, can we wander away? And I'll spread the word, and you beat the drum. Round up the troops and get the gang to come.